this world just can't be real.
So we're going to talk today about, and I will share my screen in a second. Let's roll back. So we are going to talk about Leonardo da Vinci. Now, there is stuff that you guys should know about Leonardo da Vinci just because he is Leonardo da Vinci, and that name should have shown up somewhere in your education. Like, what is it that you guys know about him? Anything, any bit of trivia. And no, he's not the artist that cut his ear off. He is very famous for one painting. Good. He was an inventor. All right. So we know he invented a ton of stuff. Anything else? Anybody know what painting he's really famous for inventing? Nope. Very close. Very close. I'll tell you what, I will show you his most famous paintings. All right. The Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. Now, here's the weird thing about the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. He only did 15 other paintings. Huh? That we know of, that he finished, that we actually have. So Picasso has hundreds of paintings, thousands of paintings, probably close to a couple 100,000. There's a lot of paintings. All right, I'm exaggerating a little bit. But in Leonardo da Vinci's life, he only finished 17 of his, and yet everybody knows the Mona Lisa. So you have to be really, really good or really, really lucky to have had that few paintings and become that famous. Now, the interesting thing is, he painted all this stuff with egg tempera. And what egg tempera is basically you take an egg yolk or an egg white and you grind up some fine powders and you put it into that egg and you mix it up, and then you pour a little bit of vinegar in there, and that becomes your paint. The interesting thing is, my son had that as an assignment to create some egg tempera paints for his college class, and I tried it last night. Hadn't tried it for years. Actually, forgotten that I'd ever done it, and it's a pain. It is a complete pain. It actually is more impressive to me that he was able to paint a decent painting, let alone the world's most famous one, using egg tempera, because it was gritty and nasty, and you have to paint many, many coats over and over again to get it to be a decent color, or to have a color that you could really say, oh, okay, that was intentional. So yeah, very impressed with Mr. Da Vinci at this point. We know him more for his inventions. Well, I don't know if we know more for his inventions, but we know a lot about him from his inventions. Even more importantly than his inventions, which we will be focusing on today, he mapped the human body. So he's the guy that figured out the human body is 7.5 heads tall. He's the guy that figured out that if you stretch out your arms from fingertip to fingertip, that's your height. That's the same thing. He also managed to cut up the human body. What? No, not in a serial killer kind of way. And map it, because you have to understand a little bit about history. And we'll go in at some point, and I will give you guys the rundown of history throughout the world from the dinosaurs to the present. It'll be real quick. It'll be like the super edited version of history. But before, there were these guys called the Romans, right? So this would have been around 500 or about 1000 AD, 500 AD, I'm sorry, BCE, to roughly 450, 500 AD. And the Romans were horrible, yet they were good, because intelligence levels kept going up and up and up. The Romans believed in education. They created roads that would allow people to get to other places and share ideas. So there was some good things about the Romans. Unfortunately, Rome pushed out so far that it crumbled. They were trying to keep so much territory under Roman rule, and they just didn't have the technology because you have to think about it. To get anywhere, you had to walk on a road. I mean, walk. So from Italy to Ireland or from Italy to, China, that's a long way. So it fell apart. What happened after that was the Dark Ages. And so people kind of just stayed in their own little hometowns. They didn't like strangers. They became very paranoid, very superstitious. And medicine during the Dark Ages, which would have lasted to the Renaissance, so roughly about 450, 500 AD to about 1500 AD, 1550 AD. Um, People didn't really know how the body worked. I mean, like at all. If you had a stomach ache, they would say it was because the devil was inside of you. So they might fix that by jumping up and down on your stomach until the devil comes shooting out of your nose and you are cleansed in God's holy light, or your lung, whichever comes first. If you had a fever in that time period, they would bring you to a doctor and he would say, "You have a fever because you have too much blood in you. We need to take some of that out." So they put your arm in a thing called a bleeding bowl and they cut your wrist and they take out a couple of pints. Now, if you were sick before you went to see the doctor, how do you think you were doing after you saw the doctor? Dead or worse. You're absolutely right. Yeah, people actually died when they went to the doctor because the doctor had no clue. He had and they couldn't read, so it wasn't like they were passing books back and forth to each other, going, "Look, it says here you're supposed to starve a cold and feed a fever. I always thought it was feed a fever and starve a cold. Oh, I've gotten that wrong." They couldn't do that because they couldn't read. So this is really a horrible time to live. Well, then comes the Renaissance. All right. And the thing is, like, people started using scientific methods to figure stuff out, which was really super important. But you got to understand when you're trying to figure out how the human body works, you can't be guessing about it. You have to do analysis. You have to basically cut up human bodies, study how they work, and that's what Leonardo was doing. Other artists were doing it too. Michelangelo, he didn't have near the interest in it that Leonardo had, and plus he worked for the church, so the church would turn a blind eye to Michelangelo, you know, doing research on how the body works because he was so well liked by the church. In fact, he was called the divine, because his sculptures were so amazing, and they are. If you ever get a chance to see a Michelangelo sculpture, you'll think it's alive. Um, Leonardo, however, not not very well liked by the church, was discovered cutting up bodies in the morgue and drawing organs and the muscles and the skeleton. And basically, he was realizing that people who worked forging metal next to coal driven furnaces who died had much different lungs from people who say were killed in a carriage accident. And this is the beginning of the compare and contrast that makes science science, figuring out what that is similar and that which is different. And they tried to kill him. First of all, they imprisoned him. They were planning on burning him at the stake. His buddies broke him out, and he never returned back to his hometown of Vinci. In fact, if you were born in that time period, you would be named after the town you were born in. So it would be Leonardo da Vinci, meant of the town Vinci. So some of you might be, Emily Day Elgin, which is nowhere near as cool of a name as LaRue. It really isn't. I like that name. All right. So we see him cutting apart bodies. He also, what we're really interested in with him today is the fact that he was an inventor. Unfortunately, he was way ahead of his time. In fact, in inventing something like the bicycle, he didn't have the right materials. There's no rubber tires on there, there's no inflatable tires, there were no roads. There were no sidewalks. I mean, there were roads, there were Roman roads made out of rock that was placed in the ground, but it wasn't a smooth ride. So the bicycle wouldn't catch on until things had advanced where you could have a road. Over on the right was a device to shoot arrows out and keep your soldiers straight, safe. So we'd shoot out arrows from the slits inside that vehicle. Basically, that's the first tank. And they could send that into situations where the people didn't want to get hurt but wanted to disperse or hurt other people. Leonardo worked for a bunch of different kings. And whenever he sent out a resume, he would list, I can invent this. I am good with chemicals. I'm into alchemy. I can do all these things. And after bragging for about 3 pages about what he could do, he would also write, and I can paint. Yeah, kind of an understatement there, buddy. All right, let's take a look at these two inventions of his. Anybody got a clue what those two things are? The one on the right should be really easy. Actually, I think they're both pretty easy. One on the right's a parachute. Excellent. So he's got a parachute. Why? Nobody can fly in the Renaissance. Or could they? What's the one on the left? Yeah, fly off a cliff. It usually ended with 2 sound effects. Ah, and thud. Are you all right? No, I'm not. Anybody got an idea what the one on the left is? I'll tell you this, it's not an airplane, but it's in that wheelhouse. It's a helicopter. The dude invented the helicopter 500 years before the helicopter was invented. And yes, this would get off the ground for about 10 seconds and hover there. But it was too big, too bulky. They didn't have the right materials. They had materials like leather and wood and, linen. They didn't have anything that was light like nylon, or any of the stuff that people use, aluminum, light metals. They didn't have those things. So while his inventions would have been perfectly functioning in that time period had they the right materials, they just didn't work. They were too heavy. And many of his assistants had found that out when he would send them over the edge of a cliff, saying, "Oh, don't worry, it's gonna fly like a bird in the sky. You're gonna take off, you're gonna soar." Are you sure about this, Mr. Da Vinci? I'm a sure. I'm at about 12% sure. Ah, thud. 12% sure. Don't ever go with anybody who's 12% sure. All right, so what are we going to do? Well, we need to practice a lot more to paint like Leonardo da Vinci. And as fun as it would be to have you guys make egg tempera, I'm not even that successful at it. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on his inventions. So I'm going to have you guys invent something that doesn't exist yet, but would make everybody's life easier. All right. I'll give you an example. Now, some of these things are ridiculous. And if you want to go with that idea of something being funny for your invention, I'm fine with that. This here on the left is a handheld portable toaster. That's absolutely ridiculous. Why wouldn't you just pop it in the toaster and walk away and come back when it's done instead of standing there holding something that's going to heat up your toast? You would actually be faster to heat up your iron for ironing your clothes, putting that on your toast, come back in 30 seconds and flip it. Um, so, yeah, that I find absolutely ridiculous. This one on the right looks ridiculous, but if you've ever had to bathe a baby, it's not that crazy. It looks crazy. The baby's not happy, but the baby's not crying. That's important. Yeah, my kids were way too old. They never had one of those. All right, other ideas. Very, very Unitarian. They're this guy has his bed and his workspace in his dorm all straightened out here, so he can clear his bed and put it under his workspace, and then maybe, I don't know, exercise or whatever, dance. I don't know, whatever it is the guy likes to do. It is a space saver. All right. Now, some of these things look like they don't exist, but actually do. On the right, you see a one-wheeled motorcycle, and these things do exist. They're horribly expensive, but they're also really cool. Thing on the left is a flying car. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know if that exists because I would have said it doesn't exist, but I just recently, about 6 months ago, saw a videotape of them trying out flying motorcycles in Dubai, and they can be in the air for like 15 minutes. They can hover 15 feet above the ground. The cool thing about them is if you're chasing somebody, the police have them in Dubai. If you're chasing somebody and they go out over water, let's say they hop in a boat, you can actually fly over the water. So it's a great idea. What's frightening is they have blades underneath instead of tires that actually make them lift off the ground. So if you tripped or you put your foot down too far, yeah, it's gonna be bad. That's not a pretty scene. All right. Some science fiction predicted what the world would be like with their imaginary inventions. So what you're coming up with today that does not exist maybe exist in the future. All right. If you take a look here, here's a bunch of stuff from the TV show Star Trek. Star Trek came out in 1960s. They had things like tricorders that would actually scan the body and show you if there was something wrong with the body. We have much bigger machines like CAT scans, but it does essentially the same thing. We have blood pressure machines now. We have a temperature way to check your temperature by just waving that bulb in front of your forehead and it reads it. Up here, you see a computer. This was them dreaming of a computer that could sit on a table because back in the 60s, a computer could take up several rooms. That's how big those things were. And they would be about as powerful as the calculator in your phone. That's pretty sad. Here you have them predicting touch screen technology. You would touch that and stuff would turn on. Here's a big screen TV. When this show came out, TV screens were like that. Not many people had color, but they made the show in color. All right. Food pellets. Now we got all those Cliff Energy bars, right? I don't know what the dress has to do, but doors that open as you walk toward them. That didn't exist in 1960. Universal translator also didn't exist. Today, you can wear a translator around your neck. You can hear somebody speak in another language, and it will translate and tell you what they're saying. And then you speak into the microphone and you press a button, and it plays back what you've said into their language. They had cell phones back then. Well, they were called communicators. But in 1960, they never would have thought you could have something this big that would have the ability to talk to any place on the internet or in the world. All right. That's pretty amazing. And of course, they also had teleportation things on things on Star Trek, which don't exist yet. But if you ever see that place Fermilab, it's kind of what they're working on. They're trying to find that spot where they figure out what tells molecules to stay in the shape of the thing that they are currently holding the shape of. Because you may not think about it, there's a lot of space between molecules. So what makes this my arm? What tells those molecules to stay in that shape? Because if you could tell those molecules to stay in one shape, you could probably tell those molecules to be skinnier or taller or to be a panda bear. Yep, looking for that one. All right, so your invention should be something that doesn't exist yet. Here you got Spider-Man's webbing. Somebody decided to try to figure out how that would work. I kind of want your drawing to be like this. You do your thing, figure out what it's going to be. You write the stuff that explains it along the side. This is a really neat one for Black Widow's cufflink that kind of worked like Spider-Man's webs, except it was nowhere near as cool. It would shoot out a line. She could swing on it. But this guy thought of everything: high-speed reversible motor, ball bearing race, solenoid activated air valve, hinge, power supply, exit nozzle. This guy really went to town, and so did the student. Figured out that the webs would need a battery. That's kind of important to know. All right, if you want to make yours humorous instead, and you got to remember when I say invent, we're entering a world where someday your meat may be invented. Like it won't be animals anymore, but we'll figure out what enzymes make a steak taste and feel like a steak, and they will just make it out of enzymes. And that'll be either really cool or horrible. We'll find out. But here you see some bioengineering with this bassilope, part basset hound, part antelope. And they've combined that with some technology. So he's kind of a cyborg bassilope. They're using him as the X-15 Cruise Bassilope official military plan. It's top secret. Projected cost $6.95. Has a sensitive trigger. Has exhaust. All-terrain drive. Fuel intake. Slobber device. Acute guidance system. Operates below enemy radar. Elastic launch mechanism. And a 6 megaton payload. All right. Now, the way I like to think about this is what could I invent that would be do for me something that I hate to do, right? Like I hate flossing my teeth. And it's just a pain. I do it every day. And the reason I do it every day was when I was 18 and working for a paint company, the boss came in and he hated to floss his teeth and all of his gums got infected. So they had to cut along all of his gums on the outside and on the inside, bleed them and restitch them. And he showed me. And from that moment on, I always floss my teeth because that was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen in my life. All right. So if I could invent something, I would invent something to take away my having to do flossing just because I need it done. I don't want to do it, but I do it because I have to, because I'm scared. I'm scared of stitches in my mouth. All right. So that might be one way. Maybe you're like, hey, I want a machine that makes sushi for me in under 30 seconds. You could do that. Or maybe I want a personal home deep fat fryer that or robot that takes care of all my needs or whatever it is. You're going to get a chance to figure that out, draw it, and label it. All right, let me give you an example. In my book series, there are things called sky sleds. And I started drawing this one last class period, and I've done a bunch of drawings of sky sleds. And I'm never happy with them. But I would assume the sky sled would be something like a motorcycle. And I would draw out the shapes. Here we got an anti-gravity device. There probably has to be a secondary anti-gravity device. Maybe on this side. Boom, boom. So those two things keep it up. This is the hyperdrive. Maybe this big round thing is going to be the hover drive. Makes it stay up and stable, whereas this just makes it go up. Maybe these are going to be infrared lights for driving at night. I do not know if that is how you spell infrared because I haven't spelled infrared forever. Infrared lights and headlights. Wow, geez, Vaulato. All right, steering column, driver's seat. Plastic bubble impact generator. So maybe that thing, when it blows up, it pads you, lets the bike get crushed, and you end up in a nice, safe, bouncy ball. Lots of bubbles. All right. So just basically, you're going to start drawing something. You might have to do a bunch of erasing. You're definitely going to do some labeling. Somewhere down the line, I might have you do a short cartoon to show me how the thing works. But that's what we're doing today. Any questions?